Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Olivia, will you please advance to the next slide? My name is Betsy McShane, and I am the state biologist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service here in New Jersey. And I'd like to welcome you to the final session of our Working Lands for Wildlife webinar Wednesday series. Next slide, please, Olivia. This webinar series is a joint effort between NRCS and several partner organizations that work together to restore wildlife habitat on private lands here in New Jersey. Throughout this series, we have chatted with different partner biologists to discuss their work and the particular species that they focus on. Each session has been held on Microsoft Teams on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. And presentations are about 30 to 45 minutes long, and there's a question and answer session to follow each presentation. While we welcome you to join in the conversation during the Q&A, we would appreciate it if you would mute your microphone in the meantime to reduce some of the background noise. Thank you very much. And just a little bit about our webinar series. On January 28th, I presented an introduction to the New Jersey Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I discussed some of our programs, and in particular, our Working Lands for Wildlife initiative. And I also talked about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. On February 4th, Ben Lange, who is our Working Lands partner biologist with Ducks Unlimited, discussed American black duck ecology and conservation. Next, on February 11th, we had Katie DiPaolo, who is a stewardship specialist with the New Jersey Audubon, and she presented Northern Bobwhite quail ecology. Then, on February 18th, we heard from Mark Virgilio. Mark is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's New Jersey coordinator for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. Mark talked to us about bog turtle ecology and the work that we do to conserve the habitat for bog turtles. On February 25th, last week, we learned about golden-winged warbler ecology and conservation, and this was presented to us by Sharon Petzinger from the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife's Endangered and Non-Game Species Program. And tonight, last but not least, Olivia Matise from our Mid-Atlantic Pollinator Specialist with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation is joining us to discuss pollinator ecology and conservation. And a little bit about Olivia. Olivia is a pollinator conservation specialist with the Xerces Society, and she is also a partner biologist with the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Located in central New Jersey, Olivia provides technical assistance for pollinator conservation in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast region. As an NRCS partner, she supports agricultural producers and landowners on the planning and implementation of projects to benefit pollinators and beneficial insects. She is also the co-lead for the Xerces Society's Habitat Kit program in the region. Olivia holds a master's degree in ecology, evolution, and environmental biology from Columbia University, and her previous experience includes an internship with the Bee Conservancy of New York City. She is passionate about sustainable farming, urban ecology, and community engagement with conservation. And Olivia will kick off her presentation in just a moment, but I'd also like to remind you that all of these presentations are recorded and they'll be available through NRCS's YouTube channel. A link to that channel can be found in the chat of this presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Olivia. Please welcome Olivia.
All right, thanks Betsy so much for that intro, and thanks everyone for attending the last of our Working Lands for Wildlife webinar series. You made it to the end. If this is the last one you're seeing, thanks for sticking with us, and if this is the first one you're hopping on, welcome. We heard some really great talks from my colleagues over the last few weeks, which you can go back and see on YouTube. As Betsy said, we heard about black duck, we heard about the bobwhite quail, bog turtle conservation, and golden-winged warblers. And today we're going to switch gears a bit to talk more about invertebrates, specifically pollinator conservation, and how we leverage our partnership with the NRCS to provide funding for these projects around New Jersey and the Mid-Atlantic. So I work for an org called the Xerces Society, which is a nonprofit that has been around since the 70s. And we work to protect wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. We were named after the Xerces blue butterfly, which is the first American butterfly observed to go extinct due to habitat loss from urban development. We collaborate with government agencies, significantly the NRCS, as well as scientists, educators, and the community all over the country and in other countries as well to support invertebrate conservation efforts. We have an endangered species program, a pesticide program, an outreach and education program, and the program I work under, the Pollinator and Agricultural Diversity Program. So while pollinators aren't technically one of the 7 focal animals of the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative that it was designed initially to protect, the objectives of the partnership between Xerces and the NRCS to help producers conserve pollinator habitat on working lands is 100% aligned with that program. And so I and these other biologists and partners you've heard from in previous weeks work together often to conserve land for the benefit of all of this vital habitat, as their habitat often overlaps. So let's talk more specifically about why invertebrates are so important, right? Here at Xerces Society, we understand that invertebrates are the heart of a healthy landscape. They're often overlooked and they play crucial and multifaceted roles in maintaining ecosystems all across the globe, all around us, beneath our feet. They're busy providing so many ecological services, such as food for wildlife, right? Invertebrates form the crucial base of the food web. They serve as food for other animals, including birds, mammals, fish, and reptiles. And without this foundation, our world's food chains would collapse. They provide biological pest control. Predatory insects like jumping spiders feed on harmful pests, and small wasps lay their eggs in pest insects, controlling their populations. So, for example, lady beetles, assassin bugs, flies, parasitic wasps, and so many more provide free pest control services. They provide pollination. We'll talk about this more shortly. They provide seed dispersal. So insects such as ants bury plant seeds in their nests, leaving them underground to germinate. And this aids in plant reproduction and dispersal. They provide really important water filtration services. Invertebrates such as mussels, they're filter feeders. They clean our rivers and lakes, and they move sediment. They remove impurities, bacteria, heavy metals from the water. A single mussel can actually filter between 10 and 20 gallons of water per day. So they're providing super important water filtration services. And then also just generally soil health. Many invertebrates, such as dung beetles, they break down waste and other dead organisms, and they release those nutrients back into the soil by consuming and processing organic matter. They facilitate that movement of nutrients through the ecosystem. And their tunneling to create nests through the ground also helps aerate the soil and improve water drainage. So let's get more specific about pollination. Just a little refresher, pollination is the transfer of male gametes or pollen to female reproductive structures in flowers, known as the stigma, and it fertilizes the plant, allowing it to reproduce. Bees, they're attracted to nectar, which they eat, and then when they visit the flower, pollen gets stuck to structures on their body while they are foraging on that nectar. Because plants can't move, they rely on animals or wind to transfer these gametes between flowers. So most plants, flowering plants, require animals to move that pollen. The rest are wind pollinated or they self-pollinate. And then a plant that has been fertilized, that results in viable seed and fruit formation. Right, so bees play a huge role in the pollination of many of our most valuable crops. They can contribute over $27 billion a year. Now, something that most people probably don't know, blew my mind the first time I learned this. There is actually 20,000 species of bees worldwide. So it's not just those honeybees that we're so familiar with, right? There's so many other species. And in North America, there's about 4,000. And New Jersey, we have about 400 different species of bees. And all of these bees have completely different biologies and needs. The majority of them actually nest and lay their eggs underground in bare, sandy soil, while a smaller percentage of them live in pithy stems or dead trunks and other woody material, right? You may have seen carpenter bees nesting in an old shed or on your deck or in some outdoor wooden furniture. And a lot of people might consider this, pesky, but I think it's super cool that they find these opportunities to nest in. And only a small number of bee species, mostly bumblebees and honeybees, but also some stingless bees and other species of native bees, exhibit social behavior by building multicast nests and performing cooperative hive provisioning and rearing of offspring. So the rest of them are solitary, living underground or in dead wood, and they only produce one egg a year. So I just want to make a quick note on honeybees, again, as they're the most familiar bee species, but they only make up 8 species out of those thousands of others. It's important to mention that when I'm talking about native pollinator conservation, I'm not necessarily referencing honeybees, as they are non-native, introduced here in the 1600s when settlers came over. And of course, they are extremely important in our agricultural systems. However, they don't provide fully sufficient pollinator services to support our food needs. And for many plants, they are less efficient pollinators than many of our native bees. So they also have different habitat requirements as wild bees, right? Since they mostly live in managed and man-made hives, although they are naturalized in America and they can survive in the wild. Sadly, when they're not properly managed or when there's not enough resources provided for a diverse suite of pollinators, they can also put a negative pressure on our native bees. So again, this is not to say honey beekeeping is bad. It's super important for our agricultural systems. We just need to make sure we are considering our very important native pollinators just as much. So let's look at how conserving and supporting pollinators and other beneficial insects can have a positive effect on your farm and farming systems as a whole. On the left here, you see a picture of a bumblebee pollinating an eggplant flower. Native bumblebees are extremely efficient and effective pollinators of many agricultural crops, as I mentioned earlier. Bumblebees and some other native bees have a special adaptation called buzz pollination, where they vibrate their wings at just the right frequency to shake pollen loose from the flowers. They are especially good at doing this with the plants of the Solanaceae family, for example, which includes tomatoes and eggplants, and with other plants such as blueberries. Some native bees, such as the blueberry mining bee, are specialists, and they only eat from and pollinate blueberries, and they play a vital role in supporting the production of those very important crops. One cool fact is that it's been found that native bees have been shown to triple the production of sun gold tomatoes and increase the fruit weight and seed set in apple orchards, right? So those native bees are super important for helping those crops produce their fruit, and they are a bit more efficient than even honeybees. And then looking at beneficial insects, some predaceous insects such as lacewings, wasps, spiders, many beetles, they provide free pest control services. So studies have found that if more than 20% of a farm is diverse habitat and not just monocrops, pest control by beneficial insects is observed throughout the field. So providing that just 20% of diverse insect habitat really helps boost your pest control services on your land. So in this chart kind of demonstrates those dual benefits of preserving both pollinator and beneficial insect habitat, right? So you support habitat for pollinators, it also supports beneficial insect habitat, and providing this habitat on farms can increase both your agricultural productivity and outputs while lowering the inputs needed, such as pesticides and paying for honeybees. And so the estimated value of pest control by wild beneficial insects can be anywhere between $5 and $12 billion annually for US crops and up to $100 billion worldwide. So it's really important to also think about those beneficial insects such as wasps and not just the bees doing the pollination. So let's talk about the issue, right? I'm sure you've heard insects are in decline worldwide. There's some really alarming studies that showed they're declining at a rate of 1 to 2% annually, which is about 30% over 20 years. And specifically, pollinators are really in trouble. So according to an assessment commissioned by the UN, over 40% of insect pollinator species, like bees and butterflies, may be facing extinction, right? So these rapid losses mean that we really don't have much time to act, and we have to make management decisions now to help protect these animals from going extinct. So let's look at what's driving these declines. The main effects are habitat loss, pollination, pollution, got pollination on the brain, pollution, resource competition, pesticides, disease, and climate change. So there's a lot of different things contributing here, and they all interact in a complex way. Habitat loss, right, due to habitat degradation, invasive plants, monoculture, loss of biodiversity. That's one of the biggest threats. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on today in regards to habitat creation. So these threats, they have synergistic effects, meaning they can combine and work together to increase the impact of each other. So for example, some pest and weed control chemicals may interact and increase the toxicity of each other. Exposure to these chemicals can compromise immune functioning of bees, leaving them more susceptible to diseases, and vice versa. And poor nutrition and climate change can also contribute to the susceptibility to disease and the negative effects of those pesticides. So while this all might sound kind of bleak, this is where you can really step in and make a difference by helping to provide this much needed habitat. So it's really amazing. And this is why I love my job so much, because we have this awesome partnership with the NRCS where we can help provide cost share programs to reimburse participants who implement conservation plans on their land. So through the Environmental Quality Enhancement Program or the Conservation Stewardship Program, about 75% of the costs that would go into creating habitat will be reimbursed to a participant. These programs and plans are designed to improve the environmental health and resilience of your land, and they have the potential to boost productivity and lower pest pressure by supporting pollination services and beneficial insect habitat. So if you decide to move forward with the contract, we will come out and create a custom seed mix, provide site prep, planting, long-term management instructions, and even without that contract, we are still able to provide free technical assistance to people who are interested. And some things we would consider when we go out to your property: take a look at your available space, what equipment you have, your pesticide use or IPM practices, integrated pest management practices. We would look at your current vegetation, any invasives or weed pressure you're facing. We'd address the resource concerns on your land. If there are any, if we're planning pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat would be considered a resource concern. And we can also take into account your aesthetic desires, right? Because this is your land, you're a voluntary participant. We're never coming in and telling you what to do with your land, just trying to give you recommendations for the best things to do for the benefit of both you and our pollinator friends. So this graphic just really shows well how many different opportunities there can be for improved habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects on farms or private working lands. We can easily spend an hour going through all of them. So I'm just going to highlight the main ones we plan most often using NRCS practices, which would be meadows, hedgerows, and cover cropping for pollinators. But first, let's zoom out a little bit and go over these three main elements that are important to consider when designing invertebrate habitat, no matter what type of planting you are trying to do. So insects need food, right? That means what that means depends exactly on the insect. It could mean that they need nectar or pollen from flowers. It could mean they need carrion or dung for beetles, or other insects also, parasitize on other insects and feed other insects. So they need those food webs. They also need shelter to provide overwintering and nesting habitat, places to live and to rear their young, lay their eggs. This also varies by species. Some butterflies rely on leaf litter for overwintering, or others might need a dry location under dead wood. And the majority of our native bees, as I said, they excavate cavities in bare, well-drained soil. So, and while the other portion rests in the hollow stems, woody material. And then lastly, all insects need protection from pesticides. This is one of the major threats to insect diversity, cannot be understated, no matter what ecosystem we're looking at. So we need areas safe from pesticides and other types of disturbance where insects can either find refuge or their populations can persist and recolonize in disturbed areas. So to support a high diversity of pollinators, we need to protect habitat through the entire year and provide food throughout the entire growing season. This is why we always will recommend a minimum of at least 3 blooming species per season, or 3 species that bloom per season when designing pollinator habitat, to ensure that there are floral resources constantly available for a diverse population of pollinators. We also include always at least 1 species of native warm season grass, which would support the butterfly larvae. And these methods, with these methods, we can create not only season-long foraging resources, but also year-long nesting habitat and shelter for all these different animals. Looking more specifically again at that nesting and overwintering resources, we again want to think about how we can provide protected nesting habitat both in and above ground within about 200 meters of the planting, so that our pollinators can have a safe space to lay their eggs and reproduce the future generations. This could be in the form of dead wood, brush piles, or just sandy, undisturbed soil somewhere near the planting. It's also really important to leave most of the planted area unmowed each year so that there's always existing shelter, right? You're not mowing it down every fall and taking away all that nesting habitat and shelter. At Xerces, we like to say, save the stems and leave the leaves, to remind folks that leaving these landscapes unmanicured and messy is the best way to protect pollinators and beneficial insects throughout the year. So let's talk about pesticides a little bit more, right? When we're designing pollinator habitat, especially on agricultural land, we need to be super mindful of any potential contamination that the planting may be exposed to. So there may be a risk of direct contact from sprays. The risk is highest when chemicals are sprayed on or near plants while they're blooming, while the pollinators are going to be visiting those flowers and foraging and directly ingesting those chemicals. They could also be contaminated through indirect contact, where the risk is highest when the chemical has a long residual period and it stays active in the plants or on the ground for a while. And the insect may come into contact with it after it's been sprayed indirectly, right? And then they may be at risk through contact with systemic chemicals, which are ones that are uptaken by plant tissues and intended to kill the pest that feeds on it. However, this type of chemical can also kill or harm all other wildlife that visit that plant, including the beneficial and desirable ones, as well as the other plants that take it up through the soil surrounding those areas. There was a study that actually found that only about 10% of a systemic pesticide is actually uptaken by the plant it's intended to be targeted with, and that rest of that 90% of the chemical leaches out into the surrounding environment. So we do want to really consider that. And then also they can bring contaminated nest materials like leaf cuttings or other materials into their nests, or use them at their tunnel entrances or their woody structural nests that kill emerging adults or the larvae inside of their nests. So if we determine that pesticide exposure is going to be a risk for those vulnerable pollinators that we are already, designing habitat for and trying to protect, we may need to reconsider the location or think about creating some kind of buffer zone, a strip, or a hedgerow between the treated area and the area that's going to be planted. And this is also a great opportunity to consider ways to reduce your pesticide use or change your application methods to be more friendly to our native beneficial invertebrates. So now moving on to the most common types of habitat creation, we will start with herbaceous meadows or insectary strip plantings. These are areas of any size, could be small strips along the border of a field, or could be several contiguous acres of native perennial plants that attract, feed, and provide shelter for pollinators and beneficial insects. These plantings are intended to be permanent, and within the NRCS standards, they need to have a minimum of a 5-year lifespan. So they're really for areas that are going to be converted into permanent pollinator habitat, say an old unproductive field or border that you're not using anymore, that you are committed to converting to pollinator habitat for the long run. We could also consider we could consider planting pollinator attractive shrubs and trees to create or diversify an existing hedgerow. So hedgerow plantings for pollinators. These types of diverse hedgerows would have a huge benefit for birds and other wildlife by maintaining protected corridors between crop fields. Or we may want to design a hedgerow to help with pesticide drift from neighboring fields, which in this case would not be designed to be attractive to pollinators, because again, we would want to avoid creating that pesticide trap. So if we're designing it for a pollinator attractive hedgerow, the same rule of thumb and considerations apply for plant choice as with the meadows, right? We want to have 3 species that bloom each season. We want to include full season long blooms, and again, unless the purpose is a pesticide buffer, then we don't want to plant species with attractive flowering periods that coincide with pesticide application times. And then finally, we want to talk, sometimes we plant cover cropping for pollinators, right? Usually it's used to improve soil health by adding organic matter, reducing erosion, improving moisture retention, or suppressing weeds, right? But we can strategically use it to benefit pollinators in short-term plantings when a permanent meadow or hedgerow strip is not possible. So this would be a shorter-term planting, maybe just a 1-year lifespan, and it's a great option for a field where the client is planning on planting crops within the next 5 years and can't commit the area to permanent habitat. And so thank you so much for listening to my talk and your interest in helping to protect our native pollinators today. Please let me know if you have any questions. We're going to stick around for a bit and answer any questions you may have. And then I do just want to say, of course, if you're interested in creating pollinator habitat on your property, contact your local NRCS service center for a visit, and we'll come out and we'll assess your opportunities and your needs and hopefully help you plan some pollinator habitat. And of course, visit our website at xerces.org, and we have so many wonderful resources available for anyone who's interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia. That was wonderful. And I'd like to remind everybody, as Olivia said, she is open for answering any questions that you may have. So feel free to unmute your microphone, or you may also prefer to type out your question, and you can do that right in the chat. Olivia, it looks like we have a hand raised from David Lamb. Feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Hey guys, thank you for the presentation, Olivia. I would like to ask, I'm a environmental specialist at the New Jersey Department of Transportation. Given somebody in my role, what would you like to suggest to me to possibly see implemented within my state of New Jersey, and within what I might be able to accomplish at the Department of Transportation? Yep, that's pretty much the question. And if you have any
Cool.
questions about my question, feel free.
Thanks, David. I actually just was put in contact with somebody from the Department of Transportation. I know there are several pollinator plantings along right of ways and in highway medians around New Jersey. I wasn't part of designing those, but I am in contact with somebody who maybe we're going to work together to create more pollinator plantings along roadside strips, or again, those right of ways that are just kind of empty in the middle of the highway.
Hmm.
Um, I'm definitely excited to continue that conversation. I
Cool,
forget the
cool.
person's name. I
Was
do
that
apologize.
Paula by
I
chance?
think it might they their name is Ben. And Hunter, who is maybe on this call, put us in contact earlier. He's one of our previous partner biologists. And so yeah, I mean any unused area that's just being mowed as a low grass cover, in my
Hmm.
opinion, provides a wonderful opportunity to be planted with diverse pollinator plants. So
Hmm.
that's what I would love to see.
Cool. Okay. I think if it is Paula, I work closely with her. We just did a wetlands project together. So yeah. Yeah, I'll let her know that I met you on this call.
Yeah, great. And my email is right up there, so definitely please shoot me an email and we can continue the conversation.
Cool, cool. Thank you.
Olivia, you have two questions in the chat. I'll read the first one to you. It's from
Thank
Katie,
you.
and she says, "Hi, Olivia. What is your position on the use of herbicides to create a pollinator habitat?"
Yes, great question. So as I was trying to keep this, not too long the talk today, the pesticide discussion is honestly an entire separate talk worth of substance, but we do often recommend herbicide as a site prep strategy, which sounds a bit uh, um, ironic, but it can help get rid of the current vegetation that may be super undesirable and not providing any pollinator benefits a lot faster, and allow us to get those new seeds in the ground to create that diverse pollinator habitat. And so the short term payoff is often really worth it, especially if we're just providing or we're just recommending a something like a grass specific herbicide that's just going to kill off that grass, that current vegetation, and allow us to get those diverse pollinator plants and seeds in the soil. Those plants aren't necessarily going to uptake that herbicide and contaminate the bees that come visit it in the following years. So it often is a really useful site prep strategy, although it sounds like may have short-term harm. It ultimately really pays off.
And I would just add to that, Olivia, that's something that you and I often do when we're working with landowners and particularly farmers, is we're ensuring that when we're planting pollinator habitat or deciding the appropriate location for those plantings, we're taking into consideration things that are occurring in the landscape and making sure that if it's a site that may receive drift from another crop field nearby, we're making sure that we're not creating sinks for some of those pollinator species and planning in whether or not we should do windbreaks and other types of conservation practices to protect the pollinator habitat from misuse of herbicides. But that's also something that we commonly do with farmers when working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, is something called integrated pest management, and making sure that our growers are using the right amount of the right chemical at the right time to reduce its impact. So that's just a
Exactly.
couple of things to add. Um, I'll read the next question to you, Olivia. It says, "Thank you very much. I live in New Jersey and I am in the process of creating a native plant garden. I work for the New Jersey Audubon Sherman Hoffman Wildlife Sanctuary. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on blue-eyed grass and bog yellow-eyed grass, two of my favorite
Oh,
species."
I'm only closely familiar with the first one, and I love it. Blue-eyed grass is beautiful. It provides that nectar resource, and it also has that structural integrity of being a grass. So I think that's a really great plant. The other one I'm not familiar with, and I apologize, but I will look into it.
Yep.
Yeah, and we have tons of lists on the Xerces website that have recommended plantings for the region. And so you could find those if you need any more inspiration of species to add to your pollinator garden. They're all locally adaptive native plants that are naturally occurring in the area and really support all the native pollinators that have evolved to visit them over thousands of years.
And I think for those two species in particular, and all species in general, you want to make sure that you're planting plugs or seeding species that are appropriate for the soils on the site. So if it's a upland with high and dry soils, there's a suite of species that will do well there, but there's also, like some of the Xerces and other species that don't mind having their feet wet. And it's something before you invest in purchasing that seed or those plugs is to make sure that they're appropriate for the soils on the site that you're planting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that.
Mhm. And you have a couple of compliments here, one from Katie saying, thank you for your thoughtful response. And you have a question from Sue. Sue asks, would plowing under grasses be better than using herbicides?
Right. So this is kind of going back into that trade-off debate. It depends. Kind of depends on what you're comfortable with, what machinery you have available, what's going to be the most feasible for you to do to get that ground ready for a new pollinator planting. So one of the options, like I said, would be to spray with a grass-specific herbicide with a low residual period, just to kill off that grass and then get that soil ready for the new plants. But something like disking or a very shallow cultivation over the course of an entire season could also kill that vegetation. So it really depends on what machinery you have and what you're more comfortable doing.
And being diligent with it. A lot of
Yeah,
our lawns and even our pastures or haylands, those are non-native cool season grasses, mostly European, that are the hardest thing to plant into when you're establishing a native planting. So um, some of them simply plowing in those grasses may not be enough to actually um, to to kill the plant. So it's not
yeah,
competition for what you're trying to establish there.
yeah,
I see
absolutely.
another.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, we have another question. A couple of thank yous there. Another question is being typed right now. Oh, we have another another compliment. Thanking you for the informative chat.
You're so welcome. Thanks everyone for listening.
Do you have one more question coming in or comment? All right, so Sue asks the question, is there a minimum land acreage for NRCS help? No, Sue, we don't have a minimum acreage for any of our programs. I would say that they're competitive programs. We have batching periods where we'll receive applications each year, and then we have a ranking process that once we've received applications, we'll go out to the properties and walk the site with the landowner and discuss what their conservation goals are and talk about some of the programs that we can use to help implement practices to reach those goals. And then the funding for those programs comes through the federal farm bill. So depending on what the funding level is that year, we'll rank the projects, and the highest ranked projects will be awarded contracts. So there is no minimum acreage, and some of our most valuable habitat restoration projects are small footprints, like projects for bog turtles, which are a federally listed species, but it's not really a large wetland that they often inhabit. So there is no minimum, but there is a ranking process. So the small sites may not always rank the highest for the environmental benefit to be gained on those sites. But we also always, similarly as the Xerces Society and how Olivia was describing, that even if somebody is not participating in one of our programs, we can always provide technical assistance. So that is always an option.
Yep. So even if you, if unfortunately, if it didn't happen that you got ranked, you would still be able to get our technical assistance, and we could still write an entire trip report and a conservation plan for your land that will give you recommendations on how to manage it best for pollinators. If, for example, I was coming out.
Olivia, looks like you have a couple more questions coming in.
Awesome. Thanks for helping me read them.
Sure. Katie has a compliment. She's saying, as a recipient of a habitat kit from Xerces Society, many, many thanks. You are the best. Yeah, I think that those
Awesome.
habitat kits are wonderful that Xerces provides, and they're sometimes the perfect fit for those small sites that may not work well with our conservation programs, but are maybe on a nonprofit's property or somewhere where the public is going to get the added benefit of educational services from those. Those are a great fit.
Yes, I love that program. And we actually, unfortunately, just ended our proposal period for the 2026 program. So if this is the first time you're hearing about it and it sounds interesting to you, something that would be fitting for your property or any type of program that you work with, we don't actually give them to private properties. So maybe not super appropriate for the attendance of this call, but if somebody that you're working with or another group that you work with, maybe a community garden, is interested in applying for this program next year, please check it out. The Habitat Kit program from Xerces. We provide hundreds to thousands of plants at no cost to our program participants for them to create pollinator gardens, either at a school or community garden, or could be an educational farm or something of that nature.
And those kits have great native species, and much of it is locally sourced too. So they're wonderful. Sue commented that she's really enjoyed learning about wildlife from these webinars, and to keep it up with a thumbs up. So thank you, Sue. We've enjoyed having you join us. And I'd just like to remind everybody that the link to our YouTube channel is at the very top of tonight's chat. And you can always go back and listen to sessions that you may not have been able to join in person or live. I shouldn't say in person, I guess live. David Lamb said that this was great. Thanks, David. And thank you. This is very informative.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. We've had some great questions too. It's wonderful, wonderful audience to have with us on Wednesday evening.
Yes, it's been wonderful. And if anybody is too shy or just that something comes up later, you think of something, don't forget to send me an email. I'll answer any of your questions.
All right, I think that will wrap us up for tonight, Olivia. So thank you again for your wonderful presentation, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.